I think you notice when you feel like you have to push yourself. So either you have to push yourself out the door, out of bed, push yourself to be present with your child, push yourself to want to, accelerate in your career. When you start feeling some sort of like heaviness to your life, that's
Mhm.
how you know that maybe it's the ripe opportunity to introduce a sense of playfulness. So it's like
Right.
our kids are the PhDs in imagination and playing. Like
Mhm.
they truly are. So why not leverage that stage that they're in and the expertise they bring, play with them and find a way to be more present. Make the dish, play the music, dance around in your house. Just see what that feels like inside in the privacy of your own home.
Do you remember what it feels like to be comfortable in your own skin? Not just confident, but also pain-free, relaxed, healthy, and carefree. Think about the most robust version of your own childhood body. This is what Lifeyness feels like, a joyful spirit and a vibrant physical state of being. I'm your guide, Professor Sarah, storyteller, teacher, and wellness enthusiast. Hello, and welcome back to Lifeyness. My name is Sarah Clarke, and thanks for listening today. I'm really excited because this episode is for those of you who are doing more than your share as a caretaker, but you also have ambitions outside of the home in maybe a creative space, and yet you love the people you take care of. This episode is for you because I feel like Melissa Llarena, my guest today, has really figured it out. She has all kinds of helpful advice for this kind of thing. She provides that kind of support that everybody needs to balance this kind of thing, because you want to take care of your people that you love, but you also need to feed your creative soul or your ambition. And I think the crux of the matter in this is that caretaking can be a bottomless hole of need, and it can take your time and your energy. It can take everything from you if you let it. And I think this is an even bigger problem, at least traditionally for women, because a lot of times the men will get support that they need, their physical needs met, emotional needs met, and they're not necessarily asked to do that extra work. So thanks for listening, and I hope you can really find some value here. I'm excited to introduce my guest. Like I said, her name is Melissa Llarena, and she's the author of the upcoming book, Fertile Imagination, which is basically a guide for moms who want to discover and rediscover their unique superpowers. They want to make a difference in the world, but they want to be good moms. It's a book for entrepreneurs and CEOs and other creatives who are also moms. Melissa's also a fellow podcaster, which is really cool. What she's done with this book is she's taken all of these amazing guests that have been on her show, a lot of successful men and women, some of them entrepreneurs. They've creative businesses. They have given her all kinds of advice. So on top of her own expertise as a mom and a business owner, and she has done an amazing job putting this book together that's coming out at the end of the month. Her background is in psychology, which she studied at NYU, and she also has an MBA. If you connect with anything in this interview today, I'm definitely going to be linking her book in the show notes. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on her website. Melissa's also a consultant. She's a speaker. She's contributed to Forbes Women. And her podcast is called Unimaginable Wellness, which I think is really cool. She and I met at a conference recently in Denver for podcasters, and the content of her show is very similar in nature. She kind of takes a different perspective of it, but very similar to some of the stuff that I cover on my show. So really, really excited that she's here. I wish someone like Melissa, someone like her, had been around when I first started having kids, because I had a lot of anxiety about not being able to have a career, first of all, but also losing my own unique personality when I became a mom. I felt like I was going to have to throw out that playful side of myself, that adventurous side, because I had to establish routine in the household and be kind of in charge of that. So it felt very problematic. I didn't have that balance. And I felt like I didn't know anyone like me, which was, of course, not true. I just was not in touch with other people like myself. So, of course, today we're going to talk about that kind of thing, and I hope it sparks interest. I hope you find some support here, and I hope it's helpful to both moms and dads, anyone who's trying to juggle that caretaking with their unique personality, maybe balancing it with a career, with your creativity, and trying to be a good supportive parent. So, as always, please reach out to me through Instagram if you have comments or questions. Take a look at my TikTok channel. I've gone back to school, back to teaching recently, and I have not had a lot of time to do my podcasting, but I've been active on TikTok since I can make some short little messages. So check it out, Book of Lifeyness on TikTok and on Instagram. Hope you enjoy this interview today. I began the conversation by confiding in Melissa, telling her how much I felt kind of left out of the workplace as a young mom, left out of the creative space because I just couldn't really align the needs of, domestic caretaking with that kind of thing. I didn't know where I fit. So this is one of the things she addresses in the book. And here she begins by explaining what that really feels like for moms.
We want to continue using our skills and talents, irrespective if we're working in a corporate setting or not. We want to be part of like the excitement, like people are doing really cool things like podcasting. And it's like, we don't want to feel left out. Like we want to play, quote unquote, right? And you know what? Do cartwheels too. Um, and it's kind of like that sense of, we still have the baton as moms. We haven't handed it off to our kids just because we had them. And I think that is part of what just deeply resonated with me very obviously when the pandemic happened and I made the decision to write the book for moms. I didn't know to whom I would be writing the book, Fertile Imagination.
It's funny because when I was reading your book, I was really identifying with your experience. I became a mom pretty early, and it felt like it changed my personality, or that I had to change my personality, right? Because I was really happy-go-lucky. I was very impromptu about things. And it felt like suddenly I had to create this routine, not only for this baby, but for our family in a way, in almost like a very masculine way. It's like I have to put order into this household. So when that happens, because I'm sure that happens to a lot of moms, what is your advice?
I think you notice when you feel like you have to push yourself. So either you have to push yourself out the door, out of bed, push yourself to be present with your child, push yourself to want to, accelerate in your career. When you start feeling some sort of like heaviness to your life, that's how you know that maybe it's the ripe opportunity to introduce a sense of playfulness, right? Because it's like, when you approach any challenge in life, of course, some challenges are going to be so extraordinary that you're not going to consider, playing or like thinking about anything frivolous in order to get through that moment. But there's, for the most part, even with motherhood, like let's say your childcare situation like just changes, right? Last minute, like clearly I'm speaking from experience and every single mom knows this because it's happened at least once, right? Or maybe your kid is just not old enough, but it will happen. Point of the matter is, you have an opportunity, even in those moments, to, roll with the punches and figure out how to add some levity to the situation, and create an experience. And I'm not saying it takes a lot to create an experience with a child. Oftentimes they just want to play with you, to be honest. And that would be like the very first step that you can take in order to start, getting back that that sense of life and that wantingness, not even willingness, because it sounds to me not enough, but like a wantingness to get out of bed, go after the goals, do something different for yourself, something fun. So playing and just looking at your child and choosing to play and be present, that's the funny part. Like, you would think it's like, how hard is it to play and be present? Well, in the book, I share how my kids, they like playing chess. And it's so ironic because for me, first, I don't know how to play chess. My husband didn't know how to play chess either. But here's the difference between me and my husband. My husband was willing to now learn how to play chess, which for a mom with a long to-do list might feel like, gosh, like, come on, I have so many things to do. I'm going to now learn how to play chess. And he also would prioritize playing chess with my son, even if, the whole home was messy. Me, on the other hand, I might have the intention of playing chess, like it's a nice idea, and I will take out the chess pieces and all of that, ask my child, hey, let's play. But then all of a sudden, corner of my eye, I see something spill. That game stops, and I'm not present anymore. And now it's like, oh, the time to clean up the mess in aisle 4, and that's how, for me and a lot of moms that I've witnessed, that's how it feels. It feels like you're constantly on the alert, kind of like, okay, where do I have to go and resolve something now? Is it like a fist fight between siblings? And that's real. I'm a boy mom, so I've seen that for sure.
Mhm.
Or is it, that this person is going to spill something because you see them pouring, and it's almost like those slow motion videos. It's like,
Yeah.
no. So it's, those are the moments, and that's how you start. You start with first knowing, I need to add a sense of playfulness in my life because things feel heavy, and I'm forcing myself to do things that maybe didn't require that much effort before. And then just starting with your child, and they can lead the way. Like, we have imagination experts in residence. Like,
Mhm.
that's what I'm calling them. So I've heard of like artists in residence at, like, I think it's like the Kennedy School of blah,
Mhm.
blah, blah. You have all these fancy, like, you're an academic sort
Mhm.
of like titles. Like,
Right.
our kids are the PhDs in imagination and playing. Like,
Mhm.
they truly are. So why not leverage that stage that they're in and the expertise they bring, play with them, and find a way to be more present? And part of it, and I share in the book, part of it is practice, right? It's a
Mhm.
practice. So for me, for example, I'm becoming a meditation practitioner. And every time, it's hard to be super present, right? It's hard to
Mhm.
sit down with no audio in my ears. But every day that I do it, I feel a little less hesitant to sit
Mhm.
down, a little
Yeah.
less scared of, oh my gosh, what am I going to think now? Right.
Mhm.
So, same thing. You do a little bit of play, like 5 seconds. I mean, we're talking real low standards of, like, sitting
Mhm.
yourself as a mom down and playing. And then the next day, a little bit more of play and a little bit more of play, et cetera, et cetera. And in no time, you're going to lose track of time. Like, you'll
Yeah.
be in the zone and you'll be enjoying it.
In a way, at least in your situation, your husband is kind of he's good. He's better at that, right? It sounds like. And I think to a certain degree, like men are sometimes socialized to be focused, first of all, to like focus on the task at hand or the playing at hand. And they are also socialized to have toys to like play as, like boats and things like that. Whereas we are focused or socialize more to kind of control things, right? Like control the household and control appearances. So we feel like we're the, janitor in residence sometimes. And I wonder how many women struggle with this.
Yeah. And I think, having been raised by a single mom with a mental illness, I would say that that was a very unique growing up experience for me, because you mentioned earlier about, chaos versus calm and keeping everything
Mhm.
together and appearances. But, as a little girl witnessing what I saw as a mom, like, I just have a completely different impression
Mhm. Yeah.
on what you said as far as like playfulness, because here's the thing, for anyone that's familiar with different mental illnesses, like my mom has bipolar, and during the manic episodes, which is when you're very like high on life and you're very like fast
Mhm.
thinking and speaking, you're actually quite playful, which
Yeah.
is really interesting.
Mhm.
Like
That
that's
is
when my mom would blast the music. That's when she would be dancing in the house. That's also when the cops would be called because of the loud noise. We were in a New York apartment. So it's an unusual relationship for me to have with
Mhm.
playfulness. But I feel that it offered a little bit of a respite, for what could have
Yeah.
been a scarier moment for me,
Mhm.
but they were really small windows, because for the most part it was, filled with a lot of like uncertainty and, oh my goodness, how am I going to help
Right.
my mom now? But I think the idea that, being playful is something for me, it's really helped me as far as navigating stressful crisis situations. Like I remember
Mhm.
being early on in my life, really when I had to help my mom, or I had to like cajole her back to safety and all these things without causing a scene in the street. I would have to be super creative. It's kind of like in real time, I'm talking to her and I
Yeah.
would have to make stuff up. Hey, we're going to here because, make it up on the spot in order to get her to like follow me without causing a scene. And things like that. I think for anyone that's listening, for anyone in particular who does struggle with mental illness in of any shade, I think
Mhm.
this is important, because I know that there's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame if you're a mom, especially if you're a single parent and you feel like you're hurting your child because you have a mental illness. For me, I actually opted to focus on the superpower that I got from having a mom with a mental illness, which is a pretty insane imagination that I have,
Mhm.
because I wanted to present a silver lining and hope. And I wanted to kind of release the burden that a lot of people have if they feel like their kid got like the short end of the, mom or dad
Mhm.
stick. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That is very interesting, and you're right. I think people, they learn to be playful in different ways.
Exactly. I think, you know, it's interesting because the way that your life starts out is not necessarily the way that it's gonna, either continue or pre-end. Because it's funny, I'm thinking about that and I'm like, no, I'm not thinking about like the negative side of things. I'm thinking about like my 60s or something. It's kind of like I could be like a really, amazing like 6-year-old woman, but maybe like, my 10-year-old time frame sucked. But in your
Right.
60s you could still have that sense of playfulness and gratitude for your past. And I think also a lot of times, as you think about your own personal narrative, as I did with this book, Fertile Imagination, I feel like in the book I was almost rewriting it, because
Mhm.
I don't think that, 5 years ago, let's say, I could have thought to myself that there was any blessing in having a mom that has manic depression whatsoever. I write about it in the book, but it's kind of like when I gave birth to my identical twins, that year was the toughest year of my life, because I wanted to, first, I had one son already, and he was about 2.5. But second, I wanted to nurse my twins, like, and yeah, it was like tandem nursing, which I know might be unusual, but that was the thing. And obviously, I didn't sleep. Like, that's just like,
Obviously. Yeah,
right?
obviously.
It's like,
Yeah.
let's think about it. Did I sleep? No. But that year was also the year that, my stepmother passed away that year. That year was also the year that my mom ended up in a psych ward or
Mhm.
institution for a solid year because her medications were at the toxic level. And so that year, it was hard to imagine anything, and it was hard for me to assume that there could be a silver lining in any of it. But I think the key was that I was still very focused on like my own goal. And for me, myself, it was nursing the twins. And
Mhm.
for me, myself, it was helping or figuring out a way for my eldest to not feel like he was no longer the center of attention, which was
Mhm.
impossible. It was really
Mhm.
hard. But ultimately, yeah, I think throughout the whole experience, it's about figuring out your past and figuring out the best way to understand it and make meaning of it so that it serves you with where you want to go.
I was looking through your method that you have in the book from imagination to impact. And I like the 3 steps. And I think I get stuck sometimes in the second step in a good way. I kind of push people like, just play. And as I understand it, and you can explain again what these steps are, but um, yeah, you want to kind of get somewhere. So the ambition piece comes in, which can be hard when you're trying to be playful, when you're thinking about the end goal. So if you could just walk us through those steps.
Yeah, so it's interesting because, I write the whole book and then I'm like, wait a minute. There's actually a thread here. And then that's when I, actually pieced them together and it's thought to myself, well, you know what? I think this is how you actually get started with, being on the path to a fertile imagination. And so it does start with waking up your imagination. And the way that you wake up your imagination is essentially you're creating an environment, either in your life or in your head, where your imagination feels like you're willing to play with it and you're okay with it as a playmate. Your imagination does not like to be ignored whatsoever, pushed down, or said, you're not cool, right? So your
Mhm.
imagination wants to feel, I hesitate to use the word safe because it doesn't have to feel safe because your imagination enjoys challenges. It likes answering
Mhm.
questions that are unsolved, but it needs to feel like it's going to be used. So that's why you have to wake it up. And the way that you do so is by working on how you relate to your imagination. And that includes your relationship with, for example, calling yourself a creative person. And so, I share Susie Batiste, the inventor of poopery, and her perspective on rebuilding a sense of trust that you can call yourself a creative
Mhm.
person. And you know what? You can handle criticism that comes with being a creative person. So that's the first section. It's about working on the limiting beliefs essentially as it
Mhm.
relates to the use of your imagination. And part of it also includes this desire to be sure that you as a mom are okay and you will have the energy you need to actually play with your imagination. So that's another piece of the puzzle in the 3-step process, right? So the first one is waking it up. And so there's things that you can do and I share different ideas and also I provide imagination warm-ups, so like journal prompts that you can
Mhm.
answer and reflect upon so you can make these your own. Because some of the people in the book are like, self-made millionaires on Forbes lists or like New York Times bestselling illustrators. And you don't need to have that ambition. But I know that we can learn from every single person. Even we could even learn from our pets, if I'm honest about it, or
Mhm.
like a bird that you see in the sky. So I'm very receptive to different influences, which is why it's also a global book. So I have people from all over the world,
Mhm.
from Italy to Australia and everywhere else. So you start with waking it up, right? And how do you
Mhm.
wake it up? First, you say you got to give it a reason, and you got to give it the answer of yeah, and I'll play with you. Like if you wake up, I'm gonna play with you. If you wake up, it's kind of like you're having a conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
And the second stage is about playing with your imagination. So here's the thing. You're only going to play as outrageously as you let yourself if you did the first part. Like if you're like
Mhm.
hesitant to call yourself creative, if you're not willing to trust yourself, if you look silly and
Mhm.
people make fun of you, but you could handle that,
Mhm.
it's going to be hard to play full out in life, in actual play like doing cartwheels or playing Monopoly. So
Mhm.
it's just hard for you to go all the way if you have all these hesitations and you're resistant to playing with your imagination and being open. So you're playing with it. And in the book, in this second stage, it's really about exploring different ways of approaching, the role that you play as a mom. So, for example, I interviewed a Sesame Street puppeteer, and
Mhm.
I get it. We're not trying to be Sesame Street puppeteers, although I think they are way cool, which is why I tried really hard to get Chris.
Mhm.
But still, like, you can learn from them. It's kind of like, well, a mom is a role just like other roles. And so look at it like a character profile. Like, this is what it is to be a
Mhm.
mom. And maybe I'd rather be the mom that plays this or that or the other. Maybe you want to be the jazz mom. I don't know. You get to choose. So
Mhm.
that's the second section is quite experimental, and it's about immersing yourself in the art of play. And it
Mhm.
really does include, exploring and almost like being outrageous with how you interact with different things. So Beth Comstock, former CMO of GE, she actually gives us permission to do weird things. And so weird can mean anything that you want it to mean. But for me, weird for me was, a New York Queens girl like taking sailing lessons in Sydney, Australia. To me, that was weird, right? But it offered me a broadened perspective on life, and as a podcast host, I can use that because now I could make small talk with people that like sailing. So there's value in playing, and
Mhm.
it's something that is not as frivolous as some of us might think. For example, I've read The Artist's Way with Julia Cameron, and in that book, it's about rediscovering
Mhm.
your creativity. And in
Love
my
it.
book, it's
Yeah.
about rediscovering your imagination for mom entrepreneurs, basically,
Yeah.
you know? So that's the second part. The third part is stretching your imagination. And so for me, what good is it to have done all this playful stuff and come up with all these like random and cool ways of thinking about things, but then not like sharing it with other people or like spreading the
Mhm.
message, right? Like when somebody plays, like, don't you then want to invite someone else to almost like play with you? Like,
Mhm.
that's what it's about. It's about mobilizing your network. It's about talking to people that can be your personal fans. So I've included, in that section, people like the executive producer of the Showtime TV show Billions, Theo Travers. I went to college with him. And
Mhm.
I remember he said his mom, who was a single Black mom, was a musician. So she taught music in a school, but then she also played at clubs. And what an amazing example to her son, because
Yeah.
she told her son, she said, you know what? Writing is a craft. Just like any other craft, you have to get good at your craft and then you could create a career out of it. And that's what her son has done because he saw his mom do it before. Like, that's
Yeah.
the beauty of it. It's like it's just amazing. And I think when you look at those three steps, like waking it up, playing with it, and stretching it, like
Yeah.
that's where you could actually then take everything and just use this superpower to create and make a real difference in the world.
Mhm. Yeah, and honestly, the more you do that, the better a mom you are. Like, ironically, because when I think that example that you just gave us, I think about my own son, and I love music and I love playing the piano, and I've always done it, never for anybody else. I just play around with it. I always played on the piano. And so now he's 16, and he in the past few years has just played around on the piano, right? He heard this all growing up. Now he's suddenly in band. He was recruited for band. He's learning new instruments. He can kind of, so it's interesting what a mom's influence can have on her sons. It's interesting to consider. You never know how they're going to use the gifts that you have and the gifts that, they're just kind of absorbing and, go out into the world and bring and share that with the rest of the world. So that's really cool. I want to know what you tell moms who may not feel comfortable in this space that we're talking about. Like I feel pretty comfortable. You're the expert here, but I think there are some moms who feel self-conscious about playing. Like you said, your word frivolous, they might feel it's frivolous. They have to work, they have to do all these things in the PTA. These are the things they've been told they should do as a mom. If you're feeling self-conscious, how do you kind of like strip away those layers?
That's the hardest part because I would say that there's forces in society that really, really, influence moms, right? Like the way that you look outside. Like if your kids have ironed clothes, right? Like if
Mhm.
your kids are part of the sports teams and they're winning and all this stuff. And it makes us oftentimes feel like it's a reflection of whether we're a good or great mom. And so I think, the idea that I present is this. Like if right now, if you and your kids are doing well, like if there's no issues, no behavior issues, if the grades are what they need to be, if they have friends, if everything is going like totally well, don't even consider the art of playing. Be about your business, be seriously successful and like happy, right? Like if everything is good, I would say don't change anything right now. Don't even read
Mhm.
the book, nothing. However, however, if if you feel that you've disconnected from your kids, you don't feel like you know them as well as you would want to know them, or if you feel like the conversations you're having with the local mom friends are shallow, not deep enough for you, and you don't feel really connected, or if you feel kind of like there's extra effort that you have to take in order to have conversations with certain communities and people because you're playing a role, you're not really your real authentic
Right.
self,
Mhm.
then run to Amazon and buy the book immediately, Fertile Imagination,
Mhm.
and be sure that you get to the Gabriele Corco's chapter. So he is Italian, and he actually is in my book. He's a James Beard awarded recipient who has almost lived like, four different lives. Like at one point he was, a chef in New York City, in Brooklyn. At another point, he was an actor on the cooking channel, Extroversion. And he's just explored so many different ways of experiencing life, some of which he admits are luxurious because, some of us have committed ourselves to like, 30-year mortgages or military
Mhm.
assignments or diplomacy sort of, assignments. But what he says, and I really take to heart, is that there's something to just like finding that thing, that topic. It could be a book. Like you could use your imagination to de-risk some of these ideas, right? You could like
Mhm.
prevent feeling embarrassed. Like that's how we could be creative about the way you approach
Mhm.
playfulness. It doesn't all have to be in public or seen by other people. But he introduces this idea that once you find something that like tickles you,
Mhm.
whatever that means to you, but something like a topic or like a conversation with someone, or you go to a country and there's something about that country that's just like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Mhm.
Follow that thread, get
Mhm.
a book to learn more about that. Watch the
Mhm.
documentary, make the dish, play the music, dance around in your house. Just see
Mhm.
what that feels like inside in the privacy of your own home. You don't have
Mhm.
to tell anyone, like, hey, your secret's safe with me. So definitely, but ultimately, just give it a try. Really
Mhm.
give it a try, because if things are not precisely as you had hoped they would be between you and your family and how you feel every day, then why not? Why not
Yeah.
give this a chance, What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to stump your toe cuz you were dancing like a wild person?
Mhm.
This happened to me. I've survived. It's okay.
Mhm. That's a really that goes back to that point of kind of like giving yourself deep focus, giving yourself the time to focus on something and just kind of nerd out, that I
Mhm.
think women, adult women, are not necessarily socialized to do. It's just like, just get, like really focus and don't worry about being self conscious. Cause I don't think it's just about appearances that women are
Mhm.
self conscious. It's the roles we play, our children's, clothing, these are high stakes situations sometimes in social settings for women. So I love that idea of, yeah, get private, nerd out, and and kind of go deep
Yeah.
on something that really connects, because that's what we do as children. We really deeply connect. because you don't have that layer of self-consciousness that's controlling you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm so excited about your book. Yeah. So yeah, fertile imagination. Love this. Okay. So in the preface, you talk about inherited motherhood scripts. Can you talk a little bit about your own inherited script?
Yeah, I think, oftentimes it's hard to untangle like our thoughts. Like, is that really what I think? Or was that like my grandmother that told me in like, 2010 or something? And it's hard, right? Because there's so
Mhm.
much input that we get. And the motherhood scripts for me are basically like, whether they're from society or familial from like the way that, we've seen our grandmothers operate or our mothers operate or aunties, etc. And the things that we should and shouldn't do as moms, and oftentimes they are things that we don't really question enough, and we might want to start questioning, especially if they feel like they don't fit, who we really are. They're inauthentic to us or the way we would want to live. And this is just like a really practical sort of idea, but maybe this will resonate because it's true for me. So I'll give you an example. Like, we're living in the internet age, and we're living in a time and space where you could work from anywhere for the most part. And my mom told me early on, like, buy a house, buy a house, buy a house, right? Which implies that you're then anchored in one area, and then you're raising your kids there, and then as a mom you are the anchor, of the family,
Mhm.
and that's where
Mhm.
you stay put. And it was interesting because then, like, even my mother-in-law said, "Oh, when you have, kids," and I think it was I already had one. So when you have the twins, you're definitely not going to move from there. And like, historically, you buy the first house and you stay there forever, according to that family. And granted, that kind of motivated me a bit. But ultimately, I'm more a nomad. Like, I really am. We were talking earlier, like, I feel like my house is a little bit of a hotel. Like, I rather experience life in the world. So for me, the motherhood script there would be, the moms in my family, we create the home. We build our home and we stay in that home. And that's where our families come to for Thanksgiving, and we have Puerto Rican dishes. And, it was really about making sure that there was a predictableness built in. But personally, myself, I remember every summer I would look forward to seeing my grandmothers. But it wasn't because I looked forward to seeing my grandmothers, because again, I was like under 16. So obviously I
Mhm.
wanted to more like get on a plane and like
Mhm.
just be around, like, Floridian waters, right? For
Yeah.
example, or like Puerto Rican seas. And that's where I would go
Mhm.
every summer. And I'm a nomad, like, naturally,
Mhm.
instinctually. I don't want to be the anchor, like,
Yeah.
physically, like,
Yeah.
anchored to like a longitude and latitude. Like, I'd rather be,
Yeah.
visiting places, experiencing life the way that it's expressed differently across the world. And that was the more authentic me. So
Mhm.
I had to say to myself, wait a minute, what's most important to me? Because if I chose buying a big house as the number one thing, my entire life experience would be different. Like, maybe I
Mhm.
would have stayed in a corporate setting. I have my MBA. I would have kept going, gone up the ladder, and
Mhm.
that was the consistent income. But then as a coach or as a business owner, oftentimes income is not as consistent. So it's just a
Mhm.
different way of totally experiencing your life. Whereas with my mom, she was discouraged from going to more school. Like,
Mhm.
her mother told her, like, oh, girls don't need to go to that much school. Mind you, she went through high school and she wanted to get her associates at a community college. And her mother was saying that it was a waste of her time. And so
Mhm.
she listened and she followed that mom script, because the assumption was she would be a mom and she'd be supported by, a man. And that didn't really turn out so well. So you've got to read the book to hear how that turns out.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
ultimately, it shapes and informs your decisions, this mom
Mhm.
script. And it's also an opportunity for you to rewrite it, if it doesn't fit right, if it doesn't bring you that that sense of purpose and like, oh, okay, I have a guide for my life and I feel like led and called to follow that guide, then it's
Mhm.
time for you to just reimagine how that might read for you.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think we've touched on like kind of the same themes, like how rethink how you're socialized.
Mhm.
Rethink how are you able to focus on play at all? Are you able to focus on your imagination because of the way that you've been socialized? So the last question I want to ask you, because admire you so much for finishing this
Oh.
book. It's so amazing. But I want to know with the three boys under a certain age, I think they're what, 11 and under?
Well, 12, 9, and 9. So
Oh, 9 and 9. Okay, yeah. A very active ages. So how were you able with your podcasting or your coaching? How were you able to finish this book? Did you have a certain like routine that you've followed? Did you have to like lock your door? How did that go?
fun fact, so the apartment where we were in Australia does had no locks, not even for the bathrooms. Which is a
Whoa.
bit of like a, "Oh my gosh," you'd imagine, right? So,
Yeah.
I wish though, that was like the one thing I prayed for, lux, and I still do. I still do. I have them in this room, but I don't have the right like desk table set up here. So my writing routine and ritual, basically the book took 2 years to write. And so the beginning parts of it were just me at my desk. Um, and that term is so loose for me, at my desk. Let me explain what that means. At my dining room table, right? In the morning
Mhm.
when I'm like warming up or boiling my eggs and making oatmeal and everybody's asleep and I'm staring at a door of a bedroom that I pray does not open, right? While I'm
Yeah.
typing. Um that's when I was writing my book. And I did that by myself for quite some time. I mean, I went through like 140,000 words by myself. And then I said, wait a
Wow.
minute, Melissa, this is not even what you wanted to say.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. So then I hired my editor,
Mhm.
who actually is in Tasmania. I love saying that because that's so cool. I mean,
That is cool. That's
my
very cool.
editor. Yeah, my editor's in Tasmania. And she lives by lavender fields. I don't know if she actually lives next to them, but I've been to them. So I hired
Nice.
her, and then all of a sudden, check this out. I got serious about it because I had to pay someone, to be my
Yeah,
developmental
yeah.
editor. So with her, I told her, I was like, look, I can't give you a manuscript right now to then start editing, but here's what I'll do. I'll give you one chapter every single week. And it was from scratch. So I would literally spend a week,
Wow.
working on a chapter. It was like 2,500 words, email it to her. She would chop it up and say, Melissa, you're crazy, and, whatever. Send it back. And then I would edit it and all of that. And we worked kind of like playing tennis like that, for
Mhm.
quite some time. The book has 25 chapters or so. And so, but that's how we did it. That's how, like, I needed to pay someone in order to like really,
Mhm.
step up the game. And for me, the hardest part was like, okay, Amanda's in the editing or publishing world. Like, I'm going to show her something that is going to make her cringe. Ah! Like, that was scary.
Yeah.
Here I am with like all these like fancy schmancy like degrees and stuff, and I'm sharing like my raw writing with someone that's a professional and has worked
Mhm.
with people that have PhDs in creative writing. No, creative
Mhm.
nonfiction writing specifically. Like, I felt
Mhm.
like, oh God, she's gonna laugh at me. Maybe she did. I don't know. I'll never know. But
No.
right, but it's done. It's done. And this was done between Australia and the United States. So like I led a global relocation,
Mhm.
for my family during that time. And the
Wow.
number of times we had COVID, right, between me and my editor, the illnesses for my kids,
Mhm.
like that's documented. It feels like, like milestones. Oh,
Yeah.
and then this kid had an ear infection during this month. And there was even, and this is funny, the acknowledgments section of my book. I had to audio record it a day that we lost all power in the house at a Barnes and Noble's parking lot while police officers were chasing a wild turkey. Hello. Like, what is that, right? But see, there's like a backstory. There's a backstory to any book written by, a caregiver, I think. And I think it's worth
Yeah.
another book in itself.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad we met. It's funny because I think we met at the end of the conference, but I had seen you like stand up and like jump around when they showed your podcast. So I was like, I have to meet her. So the fact that you wrote this book is so amazing. Listeners can get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah, and go to my website, fertileideas.com, because I have there a quiz, I have there a free chapter, I have there a 5-day imagination to impact challenge for mom and kid for free. So definitely. And of course, a link to the book and Amazon is right there as well. So October 31, I'm going to do a 1-day sale, Kindle format. Yeah, October 31st. So everybody's thinking boo. You think book. Boo, book. Boo,
It's easy.
book. There you go.
Yeah, boot book. Yeah.
That's it.
Great. That's wonderful. Yeah, I'll be sure to put all of that in the show notes so it's easily linkable. Yeah, so thank you so much for being here today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate this so much, and keep playing.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode, and I hope you have found some nuggets of value. This is a summary real quick. I want to remind you of some of the things that you can do as a caretaker, as a mom, as a dad. And that is to find some levity in your everyday challenges, to give yourself space and time to play. And remember that sometimes playfulness, creativity, it arises out of necessity, out of a need to survive. Just think about Melissa's story. But above all else, start waking up your imagination. You're only going to be able to play as much as you give yourself permission to. So start exploring. And, even if you have to, pretend you're playing a fictional role. Experiment and be outrageous. And remember that there is value in play. You're going to learn. You're going to be able to connect with others better by being a more playful person. You're going to be able to inspire your own children, not just with mom skills, but with your own unique skills, your own special personality. So rethink how you've been socialized. What script have you been given? What motherhood script have you been given? And does it align with who you really are? Again, thanks for listening. I want to dedicate this episode to my own mother. A lot of times in recent years, when I think about work-life balance and being a mom, I think of myself because I've been a mom for so many years. But my mom has done a lot of emotional and domestic work, a lot of it, for us kids when we were young. Even today, she bears most of that burden while taking care of my dad, who has Parkinson's and has had to really become a super caretaker. So I want to dedicate this to my mom. She is doing an amazing job, still taking care of him and taking care of the rest of the family. Thank you, Mom.